And I would want to tell you that that isn't the only method of evaluating wines. And so I'm now at the number 8 on your evaluation service use and appreciation outlines. What other kind of methods of evaluating wine could we use? The scorecard is a very good method. It's pedagogically very sound because it takes up the wine characteristics in a logical order, provides some sort of framework upon which to hang the different scores, and more or less puts the scores into their proper perspective, although, as I pointed out, the scores are not truly additive. A wine that's very bad in color or something like that will never score very high, and the scorecard itself may not really reflect that. The one that's most often used by amateur groups is not scoring, however, but ranking. You have 2 or 3 wines. People, each of them bring a bottle. You have 2 Cabernets or 3 Cabernets, or you have 3 Rieslings or something like that. And you want to get a test of which one is the best. So you have 3 wines, A, B, and C, and taster number 1 ranks them 1, 2, 3, and taster number 2 ranks them 2, 1, 3, and taster number 4 ranks them 1, 3, 2, and taster number 5 rates them 1, 2, 3. Now, if you're lucky, that would be the sort of thing. We make up what we call the rank sum for this. The rank for each wine for each taster. And this one here for wine A is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The rank sum is 5. This one is 5, 6, 7, 8. The rank sum is 8. And this is 3, 4, 5, 8, 11. The rank sum is 11. In a way, then you know that the A wine is better than the B wine, and the B wine is better than the C wine. We can apply mathematics to this system. It's not, and tell you statistically whether this would happen by chance once in 20 times or would not happen by chance once in 20 times. Not my purpose to go into the statistics of this here, but simply to point out that rank sums do separate the wines into some sort of order. And in this case here, the rank sum for these 5 tasters for these 3 wines comes out 5, 8, and 11. And that in a fairly real sense, you can say that A is better than B and B is better than C. Well, people like to do this kind of scoring, this kind of evaluation. Most of our life we're being ranked by one person or another person, or by our families, or by our children or our friends, consciously or unconsciously. So there's a certain challenge about ranking things, and people understand how to do it very easily. You just tell them that you want to rank these 3 wines on the basis of their overall quality. But there are some disadvantages to ranking. First of all, this does not tell us how much different A is from B. A may be one of the most wonderful wines that has ever been produced, and B and C may be lousy wines. And you can't tell that. It simply says that this man placed A over B and B over C. It doesn't tell you how much the distance is between the quality of A and the quality of B, or the difference between the quality of B and the quality of C. And if you have big scorings where you have several wines, 7 or 8 wines, and many people here, this question of how much difference there is between the wines is very difficult. We don't even know that A is a very good wine. We simply know it's the best of this lot of 3 wines. A may be a lousy wine, B may be worse, and C may be awful. But from this scorecard alone, or from this ranking alone, we can't tell you which one is how good the best one is or how bad the worst one is. Or they may all be very good. A, B, and C may be very close together. They may be wines of very first quality, but we don't know very much about that. Another disadvantage of ranking is we don't know how the people rank these. Taster 1 here may be very much color-minded, and he ranked them on the basis of how he liked the color. Taster number 2, however, he ranked them on the basis of the acidity. He liked the wines to be very tart and have a high total acidity. So his ranking is not on the same basis as this, and so forth down the list. And this leads to sometimes very anomalous results. We don't get very good differences in ranking sometimes, because different people are ranking on different bases. If you use this in your home, or if you have a little wine tasting group or something like that, for ranking wines or foods or whatever it might be, chickens or hot dogs, try and get them all to agree that the color will only be a small part of the total score, that the flavor is the most important thing, or the texture, or the overall quality, and so forth. It's very important that the tasters all agree as to what the basis of their ranking is going to be. Well, we've also devised some other rather good methods of distinguishing between wines. Ranking is a quite reasonable one, and incidentally, you could find very small differences on a single constituent. Suppose you want them to rank them just on the amount of volatile acidity, just on the amount of vinegar smell. This system works very beautifully because they all know they've got to look just for the vinegar smell, and they will find incredibly small differences. Human beings are just marvelous when it comes to distinguishing a known difference. That is, if you have a series of wines with a little bit of difference in sugar, and you ask them to rank them in order of the sugar, you'll be surprised how small a differences they can do if they focus their attention just on that one thing. So in many cases, this is a method that's very sensitive, but not for overall quality unless everybody has been trained properly. The next system that we use sometimes is called the paired system. These are sometimes called binomial systems. They are where you have just two samples, and you ask a question, a specific question. This type of test is only good where you can ask an easily qualifiable question. Okay, here are two Zinfandels. Which one has the most Zinfandel aroma, A or B? Well, let's say that B was the one that actually had the most Zinfandel aroma. We knew that. A was Zinfandel plus 50% of Carignan, or some worthless variety. So we know it has less Zinfandel odor. And so somebody says, well, B has the most Zinfandel odor. You can't put any reliance on that particular result, because 50% of the time, by chance alone, he will pick B. So where you have a choice between two things, one is right and the other is wrong, you have to give the test a number of times. And statistically, you have to give the test about 8 to 10 times. You have to repeat the test. Now, if he can pick out B as the one that has the most Zinfandel odor 7 out of 8 times, then you can say that that gentleman or that lady has the ability to detect Zinfandel and would not get that result more than once in 20 times by chance. That's pretty good in biological experiments, to get the odds so that you would only do it by chance once in 20 times. 19 out of 20 times they had to show real ability to detect higher Zinfandel odor in that particular case. That would be true of sugar. You could use this for sugar. You could use it for acidity. You could use it for specific characteristic, which one has the most sherry character, and things like that. The test must be repeated sometime between 8 and 10 times, and you must get it right at least 7 out of 8 times to show significance at what we call the 5% level. This is a very good test to take the confidence out of overconfident tasters that say, well, sure, I can tell the difference in Zinfandel, and they do it right the first time. But the second time, they're not so sure, and by the time they get to the 8th time, they're just guessing. You can do this you can do it to prevent fatigue. You can do this one test in the morning and one test in the afternoon, and that's probably a better way of doing it. Tasting a series of wine is very fatiguing, both psychologically and physiologically. And generally speaking, your results get less sure after you've tasted the third or fourth wine. Whether you swallow or not, that's true. If you swallow, well, then the results won't mean anything after a short period of time. But if you don't swallow, you can do 5 or 6 samples if you're careful without too much fatigue. I've already told you that in this sensory evaluation that we're doing in the laboratory, that's not the best way to do it. We would not normally do that if we were doing professional tasting. If we were doing professional tasting, at one session we'd do 5 white wines, and another session 5 red wines, at another session 5 sherries, and another one 5 muscatels or rosés. But we had you only one time in the laboratory, and so we mixed up these, and we apologize for that, but it was the only way we could do it. So don't allow fatigue to interfere, and if you're going to do a paired test, remember that you have to get it right about 7 out of 8 times. You'll get it right 50% of the time anyway. And so that doesn't mean anything. If you do it 8 times and you get 4 for this one and 4 for that one, there's no significance. You got to get it right 7 out of the 8 times to have any significance. Well, at the best, wine judging is quite subjective. We're all different from each other, thank goodness. And your decision about what you like the best, now we're talking about quality, not about differences, is always right. Don't let anybody kid you out of it. It's a sin against your own soul to say that you like something simply because somebody else likes it and you really don't like it. That's dishonesty of the worst kind. If you like to have pork with roast beef, for goodness sake, drink pork with roast beef, and God help your stomach and you. But that's your stomach and your money that's buying the pork, and it's your decision. It's one of the few things that is completely free in this world, what we eat and drink. Nobody should criticize us for us after we've reached some age of judgment and some amount of discretion on what is good for us and what is not good for us. If you want chocolate sundaes for breakfast and you want tomato juice for dinner, that's your decision, and you cannot be faulted for that. That's a personal decision. That's a subjective decision, and something that you should stick to and not be influenced by somebody else. Now, having said that, I think in wine tasting, that's supremely true, something that's completely subjective, but you can learn something by listening to what other people who've had more experience say, and you may find out new ways of looking at the wine. Your method of looking at the wine, when you're looking just at the sweetness, and that's what most people who are beginning their wine drinking look for, well, it's sweet, that's something recognizable, and we're always looking for some safe thing in aesthetic judgment, something that we know for certain is true. And since we know a lot about sugar, we've been born with sugar, practically raised with it from childhood, we will give an undue influence to sweetness as a quality factor in wines when we first start our wine drinking career. Later you will find that the sweetness tends to be overpowering. It's too obvious, and we will begin to like wines that are slightly less sweet. And finally we will come to appreciate wines which have no sugar in them, as against wines which do have some sugar. I've said something about this up in point number 1B, and I will return to that part of the outline at this time. If we examine our own record of what we drink, we find that most of us start off by drinking very simple wines that are sweet and white. That seems to be the easiest thing for the non-wine drinker to begin with. Wine drinking is a cultivated art. We're not born with it. And we have to learn how to appreciate wines in the same way we have to learn how to appreciate music. You started off in the pre-kindergarten in a rhythm band, and all you had to do was go dot, 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 and so forth, and everybody did that on their own little tin cans and so forth, and you made music. So sometime slightly later, you begin to sing Mother Hubbard tunes or whatever they sing in kindergarten nowadays, but they were simple tunes based upon some very simple chord, usually not a very difficult kind of theme, and only used a very small range of the whole musical range, usually from C to middle C above C. And everybody sang in unison, and we thought that was fine. You continued to do that in grade school, but by the time you got to high school, you were singing 2-part songs and 3-part songs and 4-part songs, depending on your sophistication and how your ear was developing. You had learned to appreciate syncopation. You had learned to appreciate harmony, counterpoint, whether you knew it or not. You were demanding much more complex kinds of musical themes, and as you grew older and so forth, you began to recognize all kinds of things that you wouldn't have thought about when you were in the kindergarten and so forth. And you demanded very high professional standards of performers in the way they handled their instrument and the kind of music they produced and so forth. Well, the same thing is true of wine. At the start, you will be quite well satisfied with very simple little harmonies, like white sweet wines have. And the sweetness will be the crutch upon which you lean to say, I can identify with this kind of wine. But as you get older, you will look for more, as you have more experience. I hope you never get older, but as you have more experience, then you will begin to demand dissonance where the wines don't always fit completely together. You will demand much more complex odors, and you will become familiar with them. You will want to try Zinfandel as against Cabernet, as against Pinot Noir. You will want to decide whether you like Semillons against Sauvignon Blancs, against Rieslings, and so forth. You will begin to have very definite preferences with respect to the order in which you taste the wines, that you want the drier wines first and the less alcoholic wines first, and the sweeter wines and the more alcoholic wines coming second. And that's a general rule that you will find is a very good one to follow. It's much easier to taste more alcoholic wines after less alcoholic wines than it is the other way around. So that will be something that you will find useful. In general, the goal in any aesthetic appreciation is complexity. You don't want to get tired of something. You want it to have new facets of information for you, new kinds of appreciation. Take any, well, I thought I had read, for example, Thackeray before I came to Davis. And I had a course a long time ago from Mrs. Wright, and she took us through Vanity Fair one quarter here, and one semester at that time. And I had a new impression of Thackeray. I didn't think of him as a social commentator. I never thought of him as being aware of the social sins of England and so forth in the mid-19th century until Professor Wright had pointed out to us that this book was built on many layers. You could just read the little novel effect about the girl who had her eye on the higher things of life in Vanity Fair, or you could think about it in terms of the subplots. You could think about it in terms of the relation of classes in England, of society, and so forth. Well, the same thing is true of wines. If they're very, very simple, they can be pleasant, they can be interesting, but you will not remember them very long. They have to have some more complexity. And that's one reason why aging of wine is sometimes the clue to better wine. I don't say that all old wines are better. Many old wines are dog's lunches, and you should not just pay money for an old wine because it's old. No wine is better just because it's old. But no wine can acquire complexity, no red wine, I should say, can acquire great complexity without some sort of aging process going on, either in the wood or in the bottle or by treatment, so that there is something to be said about keeping some wines around, and I'll have something to say about your cellar in just a minute. Well, now we go back down to the question of young versus old wine. There is in white wines a tendency at the present time for people to drink their white wines younger. They say, first of all, that the wines have more of the varietal character when they're young. You can tell if it's a Riesling and so forth. That they have less of the sherry character when they're young, and that's also true. Who wants to drink a sherry at the beginning of the meal with the fish course and so forth? You want something fresh, tart, crisp, and fruity at that stage of the game. And so that I think this tendency is a good one, and in this sense we have improved upon the 19th century. We have the technical know-how now to make white wines that are absolutely brilliantly clear and not oxidized and not full of sulfur and so forth, and get them on the market when they're young. We didn't have that possibility 75 years ago, but we do have that possibility at the present time. I would say white wines within 2 or 3 years are at their best for both California wines and European wines. Now, some people have cultivated a taste for old European wines. Fine, if they can afford it and that's their taste, I have nothing against that. If your father is saving a lot of white Burgundy for you when you get your BS degree, why, I think that's fine. You drink it and be appreciative of it, even if you would personally have drunk it 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. There's another sin. The one sin I pointed out today is the sin of saying that you like something when you really don't like it. That's a sin against yourself, the worst kind of sin. The other sin is keeping wines too long. That's not a sin against you, but that's a sin against the wine. And I see cellars all the time, private cellars, where they have old white wines. In most cases, they're already spoiled. Don't fall into that trap. If you have a wonderful cool cellar, even temperature, around 55 degrees, and you're interested in a particular wine, like a child growing up, and you want to see how it gets old, that I could justify. But if you're just going to show that wine off at its best, there is a time when it will be at its best, and then a time that it's getting too old. On red wines, I think you can keep light red wines like Pinot Noirs and Rosés for about the same period of time, 3, 4, 5 years, and by that time you've seen them at their peak. Once in a while a Pinot Noir will get better, but for every Pinot Noir that gets better with old age, there's another one that gets worse with old age, so it's just not worth it. The exception to the rule is in Zinfandel, Barbera, and Cabernet Sauvignon in California. Those 3 wines do improve by being kept in the bottle for longer periods of time. I've tasted Cabernets 15, 20 years of age, which seem to me much more complex, to have a much more desirable odor at that age than they had any time before. So the next time you buy 2 bottles of wine, well, vow that you'll put one of them away and leave it for 4 or 5 years. Make some sort of little record. Make your little private memorandum to yourself about what it tasted like today, and then take a look at it 5 years from now. And I think you'll agree that the older wine has a great deal more complexity than the younger wine. It's getting harder to buy old wines because of the demand in California right now. But you're a very lucky generation. Perhaps the luckiest one we've ever had in the history of California as far as wine is concerned. In the last 3 years, we've planted nearly 150,000 acres of new grape varieties in California, and we're in the process of planting another 40,000 acres right now, this year, this spring and this summer. Those grapes are going to come into production within the next 4 or 5 years. They'll be in the market about the time that your earning capacity will start going up very rapidly. I hope it goes up earlier than that, but it takes 4 or 5 years to get the wheels turned and so forth. And at that time, these wines will begin to come on the market, about 1980. And at that time, you're going to see lots of very great wines in California made from very great varieties, which the wineries will be keeping a little longer, or which you can buy at prices so that you can keep them for a little longer period of time. It may be that the wineries will never keep wines again in large amounts. The cost of growing grapes, the cost of buying grapes is so high that they may turn that over to the consumer. But that's no reason why you, in your home or in your summer cottage, can't put away a case of wine every year for some years and then start tasting them after that. I think there's something rather nice about the 19th century in England when they thought about their children more than they thought about themselves. There is a record some 10 or 15 years ago of an English country house in Ireland where the cellar contained 75,000 bottles. Oh, to have been the son or heir of that family, filled with old ports and old Bordeaux wines, kept under perfectly cool conditions, and with a good cellar there to take out the bad bottles and so forth. A real treasure, and it's sold for a real price because of its excellent condition. I'm not recommending that you go into this as a stockbroker business. There are some people doing that nowadays. Something rather sad to me about people putting wines away to age in the expectation of making money out of them. My concept is that you put wines away to age with the expectation of enjoying them more if they are truly better at that stage. but I can't deny that there are people right here in Davis, and there are certainly a lot of people in the Bay region who are buying futures on wine in the hopes the prices will go up, and are buying wines at rather expensive prices to put down in the hopes that the market price will go up and they'll be able to sell them at auction sometime later at a higher price. So far, I must say they've been right. There were California wines this year sold in Atlanta at an auction that was held there. 1951 Napa Valley Cabernet selling for $50 a bottle. I always said to myself that I didn't think I would live long enough in California to see a California Cabernet sell at $5 a bottle. Well, I was 10 times off. It sold last week, May 31st, in Atlanta, Georgia, 1951 Napa Valley Cabernet at $600 a case, which is a fair price to pay for a bottle of wine. All right, let's say something about the cork. Most wines have screw caps on them, and that's perfectly adequate for everyday wines. And it's cheaper to put on. It holds the wine perfectly all right. It doesn't provide any taste to the wine and so forth. And so for everyday wines, I buy wines with screw caps, and you will probably too. And I think for white wines, screw caps would be perfectly acceptable. There is a certain snob appeal to cork closures, that is the closure where there's a cork in the bottle, so that the more expensive white wines, even though they're going to be drunk very young, are normally have a cork finish, or we call it a cork finish, or they have a cork in them. But I think that's an affectation, and I would hope with time that most of our white wines would be sold with a screw cap, because they're not going to be aged for a long period of time. But for red wines, the screw cap gradually loosens. Some air will get around the screw cap, and it's better to use corks. It's better to use rather good corks, 2-inch corks, so they won't leak. Lay them on the side. Keep them on the side. Now, the question is how to get the cork out and how to get the wine out of the bottle in good condition. You won't have too much problem with California wines unless you have some very, very old wines about any sediment in the bottle. I'll speak of that problem in just a moment. But let's say that the bottle comes, you're buying a bottle on the market, and you get it home, and you've got to get the cork out. Well, there are various ways of doing it. The cork screw comes in many different forms. If you get a cork screw for your personal use for the future, and I should have brought one over today, get one that has a rather long screw, at least 2 inches, and as wide as possible a thread here, so that when you put it in this cork, making a great big cork like this, it gets the maximum leverage to pull it out. Maximum leverage to pull it out. That will work with a little patience and a little training for almost any cork. Once in a while, an old cork will get rather, will break very easy. And when you put the pressure on this to pull it up, it'll just come right out and leave cork on both sides and put a lot of cork dust down in the bottom. That's a very horse of another color. For that type of thing, we recommend a very simple device, which you can buy for a couple of dollars now, almost any place. Instead of using screw cork like that, it has a needle on the end of a thing like this. The needle is hollow. And out here you have a little pump. And you pump a little air in this. I didn't do that right. Yes, I did. Right here. And here's the bottle. Like that. Now this little needle, this hollow needle, is pushed all the way through to just underneath the cork itself. And here's the wine level here. So you've got air coming into here. You're getting a positive pressure of air here against the wine, and it's not very soluble in the wine, so the pressure is exerted against the cork, and it will push this cork right straight up out of there. And that, for friable corks, for old corks, works very well. Now you can buy these with a little carbon dioxide cylinder out here. Instead of having to work a little bit, you can have a carbon dioxide cylinder. Don't buy it. Don't buy it. Because if this cork is stuck here, and you press on that carbon dioxide cylinder twice, you may have the bottle in little pieces of glass in your hand rather than in a decanter or on your table. You may never drink it. and you may also get somewhat injured by the glass, because you get a lot of pressure right here. If the cork won't move, why, then you're in trouble. If you get a cork like this that doesn't move, there are some other techniques that you can use. The old GI type of thing, which is a metal thing, which has two prongs on it like that. The prongs go down about like that. Very thin prongs. You turn this up here around until you break the seal between each side of the cork. And having broken the seal, you can sometimes pull this. The pressure then, as you pull this up, the pressure exerts here on the top part, and the cork most often will come out. Even if you don't get the cork out that way, then you can use the pressure thing. Having broken this seal between the cork and the bottle, then it will press out very easily. I don't want to overemphasize the difficulty of getting corks out. It's a job that's very easy. I've broken very few of them, and if you acquire just a little bit of skill about an even pressure, pulling it out, and so forth. With the screw type of cork puller, you can get them with a lever effect, or you can get them that has double screws on them, so that you don't really have to do any pulling yourself. You just turn one of the screws, or you push down the lever and take them out. Be sure you get the cork out clean. Don't put it through as far as you can if you're using a screw, so that you get the whole cork out and it doesn't break right here and leave part of your cork in and part of the cork out. Suppose, however, that you're very unfortunate, that you bought an old bottle of wine, you've invited your boss and his wife for the first time, and you're very pleased, and so you get ready to pull the cork, and it breaks, and you get some cork pieces down in the wine. Then what do? Well, you go and get a piece of cheesecloth, or you get an old clean handkerchief, a linen handkerchief, wash it in water first. The cheesecloth will have to be several thicknesses too. And then take a little bit of X red wine that you have and wash the little piece of cloth with the X red wine. Take a little filter, glass one preferably, lay your cloth in it like that, and then pour your bottle with your pieces of cork in it through this into a decanter or whatever, or back into another bottle or whatever you want to do with it, so that you filter out through a piece of washed cloth the little pieces of cork that you have put in there because of the tragedy that you've had in breaking off a cork as you try and pull it out. It's possible by this method to get the wine out without any cork. Suppose the wine does have some sediment. Suppose that as you look at the bottom of the bottle, it's down in the cellar, you take it out, and you see that there's a little deposit all along here. Well, in that case, pause and think. Now, I don't want to get that sediment in my glass, and what am I going to do? First thing to do is to set it on in for about 1 to 2 weeks. Set it up like this. And the sediment will drop to the bottom. It will cloud a little bit in doing this. That's why you have to wait 2 or 3 weeks. So if you've got an old bottle like this and you want to show it in perfect condition, take a look at it before you get ready to serve it. And at that stage, turn it on in. And then at this stage, you pull the cork and you decant it. Let's say we pull the cork that's not quite the right shape, the right dimension. You pull the bottle up a little bit at a little angle, and you decant it into a decanter, just like I have been filtering it into a decanter here, or into another bottle. And you have a match or a light or a candle underneath the neck of the bottle, so you can see when this sediment here begins to come up into the neck of the bottle, into this part of the bottle. As soon as that occurs, you turn the bottle up and set it aside. You can usually get about 95% of the wine brilliantly clear out of a bottle that has a sediment. There won't be very many bottles like that. There are not very many wines nowadays that throw a big deposit of that kind, and so this is not a terribly important thing. I do not believe in decanting wines under any circumstances unless you have to. It's the wine, you've spent all this time aging the wine in the bottle, and now you're going to give it a great aeration and so forth. So I'm 100% for decanting wines immediately before you drink them. All this nonsense about the wine needed 2 hours after it was opened before it came to its full maturity is a refinement that after 38 constant years of drinking, I have not been able to appreciate. And in most cases, I think the wines have suffered from being left decanted for a period of time. Furthermore, those people say, pull the cork. You'll hear waiters in restaurants say, may I pull the cork of the red wine right now so it can breathe? That's an absolutely nonsensical thing. The amount of breathing that goes on between the wine in a bottle like that and this little tiny neck with the cork out is infinitesimal. And there's no chemical reactions that can go on fast enough. So that's another snob sort of thing and so forth. You just tell the waiter, yes, if you want to pull it now rather than later, it's all right with me, but it doesn't make any difference. There's just two occasions when you need to decant wine. One is when there's sediment here, and the only way you can get the sediment away from the wine is to set it on the end, pull the cork, and then decant it very carefully. And then drink it as fast as you can. The other case might be where you had some Piedmont wine, or you had some Portuguese wine, or you had some wine that was gassy. And you don't like gassy wine. It's bound to be a young wine if it's gassy. And so in that case, decant it, and it will lose a lot of the carbon dioxide, just like pouring soda pop from one glass to the next. If you've done it 2 or 3 times, there's not much fizz left. Well, the same thing can be done by just decanting it into a decanter in the case of gassy wines. And sometimes a wine that's gassy can be made quite acceptable as a drinking wine by decanting it a little while before the meal into a decanter and then into the glasses. Well, that brings us to the question of to chill or not to chill the wine. A lot of nonsense about this. I think white wines are better for being cool. White wines don't have many things to talk about. They don't have many centers of interest. So being cool at least gives them something more exciting than not being cool. And that's a good thing for the wine to have something if it doesn't have very much. So white wines being chilled around 60 degrees is fine. The usual refrigerator running around 51 is not too cold. But ice buckets, especially if you leave them in the ice bucket for a while, just chills all the goodness out of the wine. And even for champagnes, I think that ice buckets are a little bit too much. You have to have a champagne chilled, otherwise you lose the gas pressure too quick. But to freeze them until they're down to 32 degrees, or even 30 degrees, they won't freeze solid at 30 degrees, is really to take away a good deal of the purpose of drinking the wine. You want to get some aesthetic reaction to the wine. If you just want the alcohol, for goodness sake, vodka is quicker and probably cheaper, and it's certainly faster, as Dr. Singleton explained to you. And the only possible excuse for drinking wines is that you get some physiological good out of them, and also they give you some aesthetic pleasure, that they add something to your meal, that they add something to your experience in drinking and so forth, that, and you appreciate them for what they are, that there's something interesting in their own right, that they have aesthetic attraction. So don't make the wines too cold, either whites or champagnes. Now for reds, which have a lot of centers of interest, and where bouquet is the most important quality factor, that's where you want to have some complexity, then I think that temperatures of somewhere between 68 and 72 are more likely. A little lower than the room temperature in most American homes, but probably near the room temperature of what you would get in European homes, around 68, just slightly on the cool side, but not cold. And they'll warm up in the glass from 68 up to 75 and give off a nice bouquet. So don't chill red wines. It doesn't add anything to them. It really makes the tannin appear harder than it really is. And so we don't like to see red wines chilled, and most people don't do that. But once in a while you'll find somebody that does. Well, now the glass. That's not critical, but it's important. I should have brought one over. You have those glasses. All of you have had these all-purpose glasses in the laboratory this week. Those are cheap. They're durable. You can do them in an automatic dishwasher. They provide the tulip shape which is necessary to try and concentrate a little bit of the odor. You twirl the wine. First of all, you fill the glass about 1/3 full, no more. Now you might say, well, you don't have to go around the table as much to pour the wine if you'll pour it half full or 3/4 full. And waiters in restaurants almost always will pour it half or 2/3 full. But if it's half or 2/3 full, and then you try and swirl it to give it a little bit of exposed surface here so you can smell it more, you're allowed to twirl it right on the tablecloth and have an enemy of the host, or you're allowed to twirl it on your shirt or your dress and have an enemy of yourself. So a little bit of wine is better. Even if they have to pour it more times, better to have it about 1/3 full. You get more smell out of it that way than any other way. How much wine per person? Well, that's a very good question. And how many wines? I think that well, let me finish the glasses. Now, if you don't have this kind of I forgot one other thing I wanted to say. You can drink wine out of an ordinary water goblet, and you can swirl it even in a water goblet. I've done it many times. Or your mother has some old water glasses that she used to use when company came on Sundays. They're cut crystal and so forth. They're nice big ones, 8 ounces, and you've never used them for years. Nobody uses cut crystal anymore. They make admirable glasses for serving wines in, and they're just getting dirty on the top shelf up there. Bring them out and use them, unless your mother objects too strenuously, or your father. They're nice rounded shape. They have the right kind of shape and so forth. And my experience is that most people have a set of those that they got as a wedding present some 20 years ago and so forth. And since cut glass has gone out of style, they're just gathering dust someplace in the closet. Bring them out and start to use them. But if you haven't got anything else, use a water goblet. I can remember Prohibition. We used to drink it out of coffee cups in San Francisco. It's considered safe out of coffee cups. Don't use plastic. Plastic has a smell of its own, and you put wine in there, you get a plastic-smelling wine. And that's one thing that I'm not very keen about it. Matter of fact, most of these paper and plastic things are not very good for highballs either. And since you can buy glass for 15 cents, 20 cents a piece, unless you have very rowdy guests, which drop everything they put their hands on, you can afford a little bit of glass around the house. Now, if you're going to give an all-night beer party, well, put your glasses away and use something else. They can drink it out of a bottle in that case. It won't make any difference. Well, how many wines? Well, 99% of the time, we have one wine in my house. We have a white wine some days, and some days we have a red wine. Some days we have a young wine, some days an older wine, and so forth. That I don't go for this nonsense that you got to have exactly this year and this Riesling to go with this fish, or you got to have that red wine to go with that cut of lamb, and so forth. You'll find some of Andre Simon's writings in the library, which goes into great length that when you have a Navarin of lamb, you must have Chateau this, and when you have a Baron of beef, you must have Chateau that. And with one kind of cheese, you have port. With another kind of cheese, you have Burgundy. That's a refinement that I think they were dreaming about. They had convinced themselves that this was true. They were talking to a closed, upper-class English society when that was written, who could afford the luxury of dreaming of these things, whether they were true or not. None of us can afford that kind of luxury. White wines go very well with red meats as well as white meats. And if you want to have white wine all the way through their meal, you have white wine. I have it quite frequently. And it doesn't bother my digestion. It doesn't bother my conscience in the least. And you can have red wines right through the meal too. Whether you're having fish or whether you're going to have meat, the red wine will taste very good. I would say that in general, white wines taste better with fish than red wines because they're generally higher in acid. They tend to repress the fishy smell of fish so that the fish doesn't smell as fishy. The same reason you put lemon juice on the fish or the same reason you serve tartar sauce on the fish is the same reason why high-acid tart white wines seem to taste better with fish. But they won't taste bad if you serve them with Zinfandel or Burgundy or whatever it might be. Generally speaking, you start with the driest wine, because if you start with a sweet wine and then have a dry wine, it will taste too dry. It will just literally dry your mouth right up. So you start with the driest wine if you're going to serve two wines, and follow it with a wine of higher alcohol and less dryness, or it can be still dry if you want. You can have a white dry wine and then a dry red wine to follow. Now, it's all right to have two wines. One person can not finish the bottle, so invite somebody in to share it if you have one bottle. If you have two bottles, well, don't try and prove that you're a hero and you and your companion drink both the bottles. Invite a couple of other people in to share the goodness. A general average for a feast, if you don't have to study too much afterward and so forth, is that a half bottle will do two people quite well, and a bottle will be perfectly as much as they should have for most things. Now, the present situation on vintage years, which is at the bottom of your sheet, is that Bordeaux and Burgundy and Germany have had a series of quite good years. The only bad year in the last 8 years has been the vintage of 1968, so don't buy 1968 European wines. But other than that, there's some differences. The 67s are a little less good than the 66s. The 71s may be better than the 70s, but all of these were perfectly acceptable warm years in Europe. As to California, they used to say in the industry that there was no vintage years in California, but now they've sort of modified that. The kinds of situations that changed this was the 1968-67 vintage in California. 1968 was a very good vintage in California. All the Napa Valley and Sonoma Valley and North Coast wines of 68 are better than the 67s, with very few exceptions. So that we got to know that. And as a matter of fact, they're better than the 69s, which are on the market right now. But they've practically all disappeared. So there are differences in California. But again, don't use this as a crutch. If you like a 1967 Napa Valley wine, continue to drink it as long as you can afford it. And don't let anybody convince you that the 68 is better if you don't think it's better. You may listen to your friend and so forth. Well, the other thing that your laboratory outline said, and this year, as usual, I've not got time for it, is the question of careers in the wine industry. I take the soft pitch on this. There are careers in the wine industry, just like there are in the law and medicine and every place else, for those people who are interested. And if you're that interested, then talk to one of your section advisors, or myself, or Dr. Singleton, or any of the people, Viticulture and Enology, or food science in general, and they will say something about it. Now, in conclusion, I want to make a little quote, favorite quote of mine, of a man that I admire very much. I've been trying for years to be as lucky as he. First of all, he was a great scientist, he was a diplomat, he was a very good writer, and he was Benjamin Franklin. He had a great many admirable characteristics, but the one of his, besides being a great scientist, that I would like to emulate the most, he managed to live in Paris on the American exchequer for a number of years, and he lived rather well. I've never been able to do that. But one of his things about wine is worth repeating to yourself occasionally, and it's worth repeating to those people who haven't discovered the joys and pleasures of wine. Benjamin Franklin said that wine, this is very good for your WCTU friends too, wine is a constant proof, is a continuing proof, a constant proof that God loves us and wants to see us happy. Good luck.